Welcome, everyone, to the Ellen Maria Gorison Lecture, Presentation of Early Project Models and Discussion of Recent Developments Concerning the Dynamics of Future Physical Manifestations by Eric Wesley, who is this semester's Ellen Maria Gorison Fellow. Named after the daughter of Hans and Ludmilla Arnold, the Ellen Maria Gorison Fellowship is funded by the Anna Maria and Stephen Caron Foundation and the descendants of Hans and Ludmilla Arnold, who provided the American Academy with the founding donations and have since continued their most generous support. And most importantly, this support enabled us to bring Eric Wesley to the Academy this semester. In his non-American Academy life, Eric works and lives in LA, teaches at UCLA, and mentors at the Otis College of Art and Design. He is the co-founder of the Mountain School of Art, the oldest continuous artist-run school in California. Although, as you can all imagine, I could go on forever talking about Eric, I'm actually today not allowed to do so, because we are lucky to have someone with us who is much better suited to do so than I am, and this is Penki Monkonen. Penki is an American artist living in Los Angeles, whose work has been exhibited at the High Art Gallery in Paris and at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, among others. In addition, several galleries have featured his work, among them Fitzpatrick Gallery. He was also featured in articles for Moose Magazine, Art Agenda, and Art Daily. Paddy edits and publishes the newspaper The Kite. And finally, but among the many things, he and artist Liz Craft are co-founders of the Paradise Garage Gallery in Venice, California, and the annual art event Paramount Ranch. Paddy, it's an honor to have you here with us tonight, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Hi, thanks for having me. I'm happy to talk about Eric. Sorry, but I wrote this, so I'm just going to read it. Eric and I met when we were undergraduate students at UCLA in 1994. It was a golden age for the UCLA art department and for the Los Angeles art world as well. The full-time faculty at UCLA included Chris Burton, Nancy Rubens, Charles Ray, Paul McCarthy, and Richard Jackson. Visiting faculty included John Baldessari, Chris Williams, Jim Shaw, and Diana Thader. The LA art scene was centered around the schools: Art Center, Cal Arts, UCLA, and Otis. People said in New York the art world was centered around the galleries, and it was only the less successful artists that taught, whereas in LA all of the best artists had teaching jobs. More interesting and experimental art was being made in LA at the time because it was a cheaper city to live in, and with teaching as a day job, one had money to make less marketable, more edgy artwork. And the reputation of Los Angeles as an art city had been building since the 1970s. Incidentally, there was also a strong connection in those days to the Cologne scene, and artists and curators were traveling back and forth between the two cities, exchanging ideas. Of course, New York has always been the main American art city by several orders of magnitude, but I would argue that in the late 80s through the end of the 90s, LA had a much higher concentration of internationally relevant artists compared to a very small scene. A higher per capita concentration of relevant artists, I would say. It was very similar in that way to Cologne. Eric and I were amongst a group of undergraduates at UCLA who were already very serious and engaging in avant-gardist art practices inspired by the teachers and graduate students. My first memory of meeting Eric was seeing a performance of his where he was wearing a suit and tie, sitting on a chair mounted on a cart that rolled along a wooden track and then abruptly dumped him off at the end. Another piece I remember was a large wooden table topped with dirt and then grass sod, underneath which he had placed a heavy-duty vibrating mechanism powered by a lawnmower engine. When the motor started vibrating the table, all of the grass and dirt exploded off in different directions. The most involved piece he made in his last year of school was a project called Rome. Eric had somehow gotten permission to work on a piece of land behind the art department building in a grove of eucalyptus trees. Like his other earlier works, this project mixed sculpture and performance. Inspired by the Roman history classes he was taking at the time, Eric built a cinder block cube, then destroyed it and rebuilt it several times. It was an object being transformed over time with no formal exhibition, but rather an ongoing durational performance witnessed casually by students and teachers. In the end, it was a pile of concrete rubble scattered amongst the eucalyptus leaves. After school, Eric and I would often hang out at his parents' apartment in the hills above Hollywood Boulevard. It was a Spanish-style 1920s fourplex that was accessed by a concrete staircase going up the hill. It had a very large wooden balcony with a view of the city. We often sat on the row of stairs with the gate to his parents' balcony on our left, and on our right a patch of dirt with another row of eucalyptus trees, their leaves scattered on the steps. For some reason, eucalyptus figures prominently, although tangentially, in my memories of Eric's early work. The architectural critic Rainer Banham once said that most buildings in Los Angeles were the first permanent structures ever to be erected on the land they sit on. The ground on which they were built had been unaltered, stretching back into time. As Eric and I sat discussing art on the concrete staircase built in the 20s, next to us was a patch of dirt that had been undisturbed for millions of years. There's a sense of being next to an abyss in LA, from being by the Pacific Ocean, and also because it was the end point of the westward expansion of the U.S., and more tangibly, because the city is so new. There were only 1,600 official residents there in 1850, 11 million in greater Los Angeles in 1990. However, for Eric and my generation, there were always empty lots in your neighborhood, regardless of where you grew up, because the city had not been completely filled in yet. It was from his parents' deck in the Hollywood Hills that Eric took the photograph of, can we see the slide? Oh, am I supposed to do it? This model, using the cloudless LA sky as the sky and the light from the sun directly hitting the model. Just like the early film industry where sets were built outdoors to use the ample sunlight for filming. The artwork is placed in direct relation to light and to the space of an empty sky. The availability of empty space does something to your outlook. It gives you a sense of possibility, and it also informs what art you might make. It is no accident that light and space was the name given to an earlier era of art from Los Angeles. The availability of light and space was what attracted both the movie industry as well as the aerospace industry to the area. The post-World War II era is what gave birth to Los Angeles as we know it. Modern freeways connecting sprawling developments of suburban tract homes. The power and social importance of science and engineering in the Cold War era was evident in a huge government-funded aerospace industry as well as a robust university system. The belief in technological progress was pervasive, as well as the dream of social progress. Much of the specific history of Los Angeles that includes the post-war belief in progress in science, as well as social crises and political failure, can be seen in the work of Chris Burton, who was not only the most well-known professor at UCLA, but who had also been teaching there since the 80s and can be credited for building the program that Eric and I were so lucky to be involved in. And I think, this is not written, but I think Chris Burton is an important artist, especially for Eric, in a variety of ways. Chris Burton's work, I mean, even in those early pieces, you can see the influence. Chris Burton's work contains a critique of technological violence, but also an experimental engagement with science and engineering. His career began with his own body getting shot or electrocuted, but then progressed to building experimental vehicles. His performances and actions were often witnessed by a few people, with documentation or notes being presented in the gallery or the museum, being presented in the gallery or the museum exhibitions. In other words, he borrowed forms from scientific fields in which research was an end in itself and the results were made public after the fact. It was in this modern post-war university in a modern post-war city that Eric and I began our own research. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Thanks, everybody, for coming out this evening to hear me talk. I also am going to read quite a bit. And so really excited to be here and to talk about my artwork and what I'm up to, and to share with you a proposal hereby submitted for your consideration, the model of which is out in the lobby. And I'm going to talk about that project, but first I would like to briefly talk about art history as it pertains to the idea of nothing, or if it makes you feel more comfortable, nothingness. I'd like to thank the Academy, of course, for providing such a wonderful experience and facilitating everything, including time itself, which affords me time to work on nothing. I should say resources from academic research material and communication assistance with the greater world to living and working space and production capabilities are just phenomenal here. The camaraderie of the fellowship, not always vocalized, but always felt by this fellow, is inspiring. And because we are all from such different fields and have such diverse interests, the dialogue is consistently rich and entertaining. And the leadership and staff at AAB remains driven and progressive and always supportive, even in the face of adversity, or in my case, often confusion. I'm happy to give my talk towards the conclusion of the term. I am a sensitive artist and a reactionary man. As such, this time frame allows me to share with you a more accurate account of not only the work, but also personal experiences. I recall Litz, the gatekeeper, guiding me through the cement maze of a bunker underneath the villa where I had planned to hold dice games, and Renee giving me a tour of the equally amazing attic where I planned to hold dice games. Matthias, who I am convinced is actually the president, hooked me up with a ream of A4 paper that first day, which I later used to print my own currency. That old trick, which never works, by the way. Still waiting to see that on my monthly tab. Chris in IT, I finally figured out the turn it off and turn it back on thing. And Daniel, I know you're out there. I promise to not tell anybody about the UAPs, or as they call them outside of the company, UFOs. Barrett, did you get the email I sent like a minute and a half ago? It says, thanks for the sharp introduction. But really, thank you for all the real introductions, facilitating these things. If I go on with these shout-outs and whatnot, this will be a 3-hour lecture. So let me just say, in the words of Wolf Blitzer, thank you very, very much. In the spirit of further ado, I'd like to mention that I don't believe I have ever given a talk before such an esteemed and diverse group of thinkers. Usually I find myself before a more homogeneous audience that is talking to, for, and within the art world context. So I'm very happy and honored and excited to be here tonight. Neil deGrasse Tyson, your personal astrophysicist, as he's titled himself, looks to artists to feel the universe as opposed to merely represent reality. Dr. Tyson claims through extensive research, Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, painted in 1888, is the first picture in which the background is the subject of the artwork. For him, the personal and cultural importance of said painting is due to the artist's conviction for feeling, not simply the skill of representation of the empirical. It is clear from the scientist's raw excitement that this is what inspires him, hammering home the point by adding that the background is the night sky, thus elevating the cosmos as fair game for the artist. In terms of cultural and personal importance, I champion Albrecht Dürer's Great Piece of Turf, made some 377 years before Starry Night. I suggest that, like the Starry Night, the subject of Great Piece of Turf is also the background. However, in the case of the Dürer, that subject via background is both felt and representative of reality. For me, the artwork delivers a more profound concept than even the cosmos: nothing. The variables are set at odds with each other, as in the titling of the picture, Starry Night versus the Great Piece of Turf. A formula centers around these two artworks. The Starry Night, which will not be projected for the cajillionth time on my watch, remains trapped in a representational sphere, cosmos and all. With the Dürer picture, the vacuum created by the blank canvas of the background acts as a potential escape mechanism from what we call our turf. Meanwhile, in Italy, around the same time, Leonardo da Vinci illustrates Luca Pacioli's mathematical treatise Divina Proportionale, 1498. I will save the obvious northern versus southern debacle for later in the lecture, where I address the notion of orientation. The importance of this image, at least within the context of this talk, is fundamentally of a formulaic nature. That is, the development of a kind of equation. Firstly, the visualization of Pacioli's written scientific work lends itself to not only the dimensionality and proportionality of something, or conversely nothing, but also to aesthetic development. This then leads to the investigation by Euclidean means, that is geometry, of the archetypal phenomenon known as the golden ratio. Continuing down this spiraling path, no pun intended, of causality, I argue that although Fibonacci did not make the direct connection himself, his work, namely the Fibonacci sequence, is responsible for connecting quanta with nature itself. The manner in which Da Vinci treats the subject heightens it from a technical endeavor to art. Secondly, the assumed title from which the Platonic solid, the cube, hangs, Exosedron planius vacuus, or according to my computer translator, the chamber is empty, defines the artistry, for lack of a better term, gives the picture meaning and illustrates its content. Perhaps the visual manifestation can be identified through the transmutation of written language, vacuous to empty, or vice versa. Finally, I'd like to point out that the pictorial representation of gravity, the physical phenomenon not understood until Isaac Newton some 200 years later, not to say that that one's in the bag. What might the physical phenomenon of gravity, or relativity for that matter, have to do with emptiness or vacuous? Fast forward some 400 years, not long after Van Gogh paints Starry Night, and we are offered or confronted with this gadget. Titled Air de Paris, or 50 cc's of Paris air, this particular edition sold for $845,000, I think, is what it was saying. And I bring this up for several reasons that I'll get to in this talk, but mainly due to my understanding of the impetus or inimpetus of the piece. The story tells of a young Deschamps' desire to present a worthy gift to a wealthy art collector friend, thereby faced with the conundrum of what to give the man who has everything. In this case, I ask myself, where does the nothing reside? Forcing the question of location, the eventuality is a paradox. Thought itself, the idea, is something. Nevertheless, the true value of this work lies in its ability to identify and address the quagmire of something, everything, versus nothing, something being in nothing, nothing being in something. Deschamps was all about shopping, settling on air, the baryonic representative of nothing. Not only did he get a good deal, think about those profit margins, but he was also able to give literal shape to meaning and theory. The myth or story of the work becomes the currency. Here comes Pollock. With painting like this, it doesn't matter, Deschamps dickishly said, referring to the cutting off of part of a mural that didn't fit in Peggy Guggenheim's home. However, with painting like this, I say we have an interesting modernist approach to both science and art in regards to this nothing business. I've been fighting the urge to mention the term sublime for decades now, but more to the point in relation to this talk and the artwork I'm presenting here today. So let me instead digress towards chaos. Theory. Disclaimer, I am simply expressing my understanding of topics science-related. Pollock is about the atomic, and the atomic is all about structure, and the atomic structure can be seen as all about decay. This work, along with the majority of Pollock's pictures, addresses the nothing or nothingness in the following way. Given the picture plane or canvas is a model of a vacuum, and if the vacuum can be understood as nothing, or at least approaching nothing, and now onto this you add the artist's input, say imagery or mark making, which is likewise trending towards diminishment of the state of something by virtue of physical interaction, friction, for example. What follows is the synthesis of a model which approaches everything. Pollock's embracement, conscious or not, of the baryonic, or that which is made up of atoms, informs and is informed by post-war popular culture, the realization of the atomic composition of what they then assumed was the totality of the universe was both local news and instantaneously global doctrine. Much like Tyson's assessment of Van Gogh's Starry Night, the importance of addressing the background, the cosmos in that case, as the subject of the picture, with Pollock we get a closer look at things, much closer. I don't think you can get any closer. We are looking at the things that make up the things that make up everything, or at least 4%. Looks like nothingness is nowhere in sight. Niels Bohr said, "Everything we call real is made up of things that cannot be regarded as real." And he fucking meant it. My question is, if something is not real, is it nothing? This is an image of a kind of post-event advert for the artist Yves Klein's brand of nothing, The Void. The picture itself, a game changer in terms of photography, is a technical wonder as well as a conceptual one. It is titled Leap into the Void. Unlike the color International Klein Blue, he doesn't get credit for this one. The Void, which is the title of the actual art show in 1958. This was from 1960. I would show you documentation of the exhibition itself, but the images are too graphic for public display, and I fear by doing so, I may inadvertently contribute to the demystification of both the art and the void itself. In general, and in the real world, the void is an all too familiar term which addresses the outskirts of nothing without being too offensive to the physics/metaphysics of the contemporaneous rationale of logic. Yves Klein's Leap into the Void photograph promotes this logic while simultaneously approaching the sublime. A conceptual connection apparent in many artworks concerning themselves with this almost religious provocation. The show The Void featured the art gallery emptied. Emptied in quotes here because with the benefit of time and the ever-expanding understanding of the nature of the universe, we now recognize, as I'm sure Yves Klein did, the true nature of an empty space as full. In summary, the weight of Durer's turf is undeniable, almost as violently heavy as Pollock's picture. Splat, I have written here. Da Vinci gives us something to think about. Deschamps counters, but It is this single film frame, it's actually two film frames spliced together, that gives us pause and that humanizes nothing. This concludes my lecture on nothing in art, with an honorable mention to the work of one Michael Asher, who carried on this particular vein of thinking and expressing this difficult subject. Before talking about my own work, I'd like to say that I believe that in these times, the zeitgeist, there is neither the zeit nor the geist for the metaphysical implications of theorizing on the possibility of nothing, which is too bad. And so, back to business. The title of this lecture is Presentation of Early Project Models and Discussion of Recent Developments Concerning the Dynamics of Future Physical Manifestations. And if you don't like it, you can get the fuck out. I always wondered what made Yves Klein jump. Of course, this is the crux of the artwork. Put another way, what is the appeal of nothing, or nothing's more sophisticated cousin, the void? My first encounter with the term void was from sometimes having to write the word across my personal bank checks to cancel them for whatever reason. Negating the document felt good. Like much of my artwork, here I rely on model making to express, represent, demonstrate, etc. the idea. In a sense, I consider sculptures, pictures, performative work, conceptual work, objects, all of it, models, and model making the ultimate creative act. Modeling thought and ideas comes in many forms and ways. I consider all manner of the discipline: mathematical modeling, fashion modeling, architectural modeling, and so on. The model shown here is a quick sketch, a trifle, but I hope it demonstrates the power of employing many diverse forms of model making. I plan to develop a collective business model, partially to facilitate the production of the greater project while functioning in the real world by benefiting those involved. This paper model acts as a kind of scenario builder. Business in general takes too much time and involves too many people to shape or model by myself. If I am to attempt the greater endeavor of modeling nothing, as is my intent, I would need to intentionally put the proverbial cart before the horse. Hard science over socio-culture. This, I believe, will enable me to more effectively manifest abstract thought. Haydn without a wig. Young people can learn from my example that something can come from nothing. That is a quote of Joseph Haydn. For quite some time, maybe 15 years or so, I've been thinking about an artwork based on Stalin. What I mean to say is I have been working on Stalin in the studio. I consider it a kind of monument. For years and years, I left no physical trace, maybe some research on a huge granite block or something, but that's about it. I was obsessed with not beginning or somehow abstractly initiating the project, the model, then immediately pausing, waiting. There was a perversion developing. So this is, on the left is Stalin's head on Biden's body, and on the right, the head of Biden on the Stalin body. I would be remiss to gloss over the importance of politics within the fundamental development of the model. Indeed, the modeling of nothing, that is, my proposed project, has deep roots in the exploration of the human condition. Politics produces choices. Choices force answers, and answers spawn politics, ad infinitum. Politics, in a capital P Platonic sense, do not recognize the concept of nothing, even of the most abstract and passive variety. However, due to the inherent strength of the natural aesthetic, beauty perhaps, the origins of the concept of the nothing model remains unscathed by the hands and law of man. Out of a desire to finalize the modeling process, the untouched, or rather uncarved stone block becomes symbolic. I consider the earlier work on this phase of the project as performative in one sense and conceptual in another. Everything is political except nothing. This was my creative out, my escape from this human condition nonsense. Through phonic innuendo, historical reference, and language itself, the modeling, or perhaps in this case, demodeling of political aspects became organic. I liken this idea to some sort of muscular development in an organism, muscle memory to boot. This is all conceptual, non-physical reflection on my part, self-help at best, masturbatory at worst. The overarching doctrine became about, or perhaps always was, to wait, or rather to never begin. What happened next will shock you. Just kidding. What happened next was the transmutation of the Stalin model, perhaps brought about by stagnation, forced the materialization of a Haydn model, resulting in now not only behaving as a product of waiting, but one of absence. For years, it was in this state, this project, not able to be found, a figment only in the temporal dimension. Biden's time on the world stage acted as a catalyst for the project, instantaneously and permanently altering the state of the physical form. Haydn was relinquished, causing the dichotomy illustrated by the two sculptures pictured here. Return policy. I've been thinking about the return policy of Amazon. I like it, and I find it relatively easy and fair enough. I have not tried the Amazon wardrobe thing, but I like the idea. In regards to model making, these devices and techniques allow one to try things out before committing, which nourishes the adventurous side and the experimental side, and streamlines both production and the editing process. Saves money too. I bought the Biden bobblehead and the bust of Stalin online. Together with the Haydn I picked up in Vienna, the Joe trifecta was complete. For a second, I forgot. Keep his name out of it. One thing I would like to mention about the Haydn factor is that Haydn was a strict formalist. And that's how I like my formalists. He was a formalist. This spirit has a lot to do with the fundamental modeling protocol of interest for my pursuit of identifying nothing. Following this Haydn protocol and consequently supplanting the figure itself was the next step. After swapping heads and molding and casting the sculptures, I reboxed them with plans of returning them back into the wild or the Amazon. Ironically, this fugue is homage to Haydn. So it takes the relinquishing Haydn to create something, this fugue between the other two guys. And I find that, ironic, as I said, but at this point, it was clearly time to advance the project and deal more with the rudimentary causes of the formalist sculpture. Starting at another beginning, that is, once the project was adapted to and for the current situation here at AAB, the process of boiling away all non-essential aspects commenced. No politics, no financial issues, no prescribed time frame. Even art history was dismissed in favor of an honest pursuit of the ever-elusive nothing. And I've noted good luck with that. Perhaps nothing is too strong a word. This model, which I think of as a kind of figurine, is tentatively titled The Little Nothing. I think of it as a proposal to myself and an introduction of the orthotope, a three-dimensional rectangular-based geometric form, like an elongated cube, or as Mr. Munkinen puts it, a shape like all other shapes, which I don't know what that means, but that's a great definition. I like the idea of little nothing existing within the model on display in the lobby, big nothing. In that case, an infinite regression, infinite progression scheme would be initiated. However, due to the fact that each element is closed to the viewer, this phenomenon would be unobservable and unknown without further information. This may in fact be the case. This sculpture could be in that other sculpture. I don't know. The rendering of a veiled scaffolding erection becomes an image. Ostensibly, something is present within each shell, radiating outward and collapsing inward, never touching, but asymptotically plotting that which we can only refer to as nothing. Little nothing could also illustrate a solid, let's say stone sculpture, its surface modeled to resemble the shape and texture of a veiled framework. Through this thought experiment, another form of model making, a romantic notion of its true self becoming a projection of that which is inside is posed. This is akin to the idea of the artist freeing a figure, let's say, from the stone block with a vision and a chisel. Little Nothing was imported from Los Angeles. It was the only artwork I brought from my home shop. Actually, I just brought with me the molds and then cast and assembled the thing here. Which that then begins to speak on this kind of the compressibility of information and how the mechanics of that process might benefit future modeling endeavors, but that's a stretch, no pun intended. I approached the modeling of the architectural model Big Nothing, the proposal in the lobby, more like a formalist composition, and related its physical construction to the real-world logistics necessary to realize the greater project. That is, the actual full-scale structure. To be considered are location and placement, presumably here at the Academy, or I should say out there in the garden or the lawn out back, which I encourage you to check out if you haven't. And the production, economic, social, cultural aspects, timing, all that, which is exactly what I just said I don't want to deal with fucking a minute ago. Concerning time, at this point, I think I had decided that the artwork should exist for just one day. The scaffolding company would come, set up the whole thing in the morning, rent it, of course, wrap it, shrink wrap it, let it do its thing for a day, May 1st, May Day, which was yesterday. And then the next day disassemble and remove it. And I'll discuss more conceptual implications of time as it refers to this project later. I became minorly obsessed with drapery once the shape, form, proportionality, let's say the geometry, was figured out. The importance of the surface or appearance of the thing is hard to describe. It's one thing to veil something, it's another to sculpt something. But sculpting is veiling, and veiling is sculpting, right? I don't know, I'm thinking about these things. But in general, it became a little bit like putting the clothes on a figure. Here, figure with big quotes. I identify the surface treatment of the model as not only interacting with gravity, of course, but illustrating or at least referencing gravity in another way. The association between surface and gravity has to do with the kind of analogy of or to atomic matter, which I will explain shortly. There is also the importance of topology to consider, and that is a tricky one. One thing that interests me concerning drapery is that the material, whatever it is, simultaneously reveals form in space, as in the metal framework under the veil, and obscures it. In the end, I think there's something about the surface defining the style of the sculpture or architecture or model. I'd like to now take some time out to talk about dark matter and pop culture. I just described the modeling work done mostly in Los Angeles. Once my orthotope was assembled here in Berlin, I immediately wanted to rework it, adapt it to this new environment, and introduce it to a different sphere of influence. I knew what I wanted, I just had to find it, so I went shopping. Initially, I targeted laundry detergent boxes, but it just wasn't right. Don't know why. Then pasta boxes, available in such an array of shapes and proportions and sizes, but the content bothered me. This box of cereal, Choco Balls, hit. I imagined the dark brown balls as dark energy somehow, and the air between everything in the boxes, dark matter, and the paper box, normal matter. I didn't even have to do anything with it, but of course I did, and I fucked it up. In an attempt to represent and investigate this reality, I have adopted an analogical scheme that I physically correlate with my modeling of nothing. I hope to produce a kind of visual narrative whereby material can become relative to non-material. Relationships are formed and set into action, behaviors and energies are exercised, and the whole thing fits on a desk. So I started to think about this this kind of scheme to represent the universe. This is the scheme. Take the pre-existing model, the orthotope, like the one pictured here, a version of the veiled scaffolding plan. Break it down elementally. Add up like components with like components to realize the total mass of each element, and match that element with the corresponding element of the universe. This sounds confusing, but that's just due to my poor communication skills. Lucky for us, the physical makeup of our model dovetails with the compositional breakdown of the universe, in that we have three components of each to consider, right? The inside of the orthotope, the framework itself, scaffolding, and the skin. By correlating the values in whatever metric, volume is my default, we get presumably air inside the orthotope model, and a lot of it. The majority of the model is air, and so that is associated or paired with dark energy, as that makes up the vast majority of the universe. The metal scaffolding would be 10-20% of the volume, that's dark matter. And finally, the skin is the baryonic, which is very fitting. This is where the surface treatment, the drapery aspect that I mentioned, and its relation to gravity comes in. With the model here, the decoration on the face of the thing addresses this idea somehow. Okay, this is where I run into problems with this lecture because in a lot of ways this is where I'm at right now with the artwork and this project and so this is the most difficult facet of this project to me to talk about or even approach intellectually at all or in a substantial way is orientation. And so I would like to read. Well, what can I say? Orientation is not so much a tool of model making, but a kind of directive. And so I find myself right now like hesitant to talk about it, but I want to, but it's, it's a hard thing to approach, and it has to do with like bad things like death and ancient history and so so maybe I can read something. In the first place, we moderns are accustomed to thinking of right and left in connection with ourselves, or in philosophic terminology, we think of them as something subjective and not objective and permanent. Man is considered the unit to which they are related. This has relegated all right and left matters to an unimportant place. It was quite otherwise in antiquity, and the antique idea can be traced for some 4,000 years or more, well into the Middle Ages. This antique idea was that the world itself, and not man, has a basis of orientation and direction, and that it was to the world as a whole that the ideas of right and left, luck and misfortune were related. There was a front and a back, a right and left of the world. These were objective and permanent factors to which the human associations of right and left were entirely subordinate. And so I share with you this image, and this image is a kind of map of the back garden, the back lawn where I propose to install or actuate this artwork, the big nothing, or probably be the big nothing, but. And so that's kind of the footprint there. This would be the orthotope. And so there's this kind of scheme going on, but it's not figured out, so I won't waste any more time talking about it. But do want to say I have written here, I don't know if I already read this, but death could be understood as an orientation to of nothing. I think that, yeah, I'll leave it at that. And get onto something more logical, like time. I've saved time for last. Regarding the physical modeling of time, I bet every human being has asked the question, what is time? Einstein did, and it seems he got an answer, albeit in relation to physical space. The theoretically proven phenomenon of Hawking radiation, which tells us that it is possible for something, light, to escape a black hole, the closest thing to nothing I can think of, must relate to the question at hand. They say time started 13.8 billion years ago, along with everything else in the universe. Can these big, unimaginable, and theoretical questions be used as modeling tools to suss out nothing? From an art making and viewing perspective, I appreciate these potential tools and attempt to implement them at scale. Time as a modeling instrument in the form of a linguistic device is evident as the viewer processes the base text of the scale model proposal, the big nothing. It reads in part, MMXXIII, may I, which is then signed by the model maker, which is me. Here I give a timeline, actually two, for the project. 2023, making a long mark, an annual demarcation, and indicates the production time. And then May 1 makes a short mark, 1 day, and functions as a kind of implementation of this kind of event ad, like a birthday or so. And it has to do with the life of the completed piece. It should exist for just 1 day. And the physical implementation of this plan relies on the light, on the sun. Thank you very much. I've got questions for you. What didn't make sense?
I think it was all really clear.
Yeah.
Wait, nothing didn't make sense? No, it's good. It was. I think it's like you were saying.
Well,
the more you work on it, it starts to become like an artwork in itself. The lecture, which is, you know, we're lucky that you did that.
Well, I mean, but you know, I ask you because you know, I know you're a naysayer on these kinds of questions of, or you know, like you said, you don't have anything to say about nothing.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. Well,
or this is.
I haven't thought about it as much as you.
This is not a topic that interests you.
Yeah, I mean, it's very philosophical, but I appreciate it. You know, like I'm happy that you're doing that hard work because it's almost like the frame is the thing. You know, like you can never talk about what's inside the void, but then there's all these roads you try to make into it or something. that it's like a mirror. I mean, this is maybe not a good example, but it's like by trying to talk about nothing, then all these other things come up that aren't nothing. But then that's a weird
and that's
thing that happens.
language.
Yeah, language. And like it's a weird process. It's like meditation or something, I guess. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't really understand why. But I don't think that matters, like your motivation to keep pursuing that. And then it's like your personal take on it, like, so it seems like very generalized, but then it becomes very specific and personal in the way you try to get there to this project. Which is not, I mean, that's enjoyable to me. Like how you navigate.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's in keeping with the lecture. I just think that's my own reaction.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was terrific. Really interesting. And so I was thinking in the early part of your talk about being traumatized, I'm sort of joking, as a child because my father was a meteorologist, or what they used to call meteorologists before they became the people who talked about the weather on television. He was a climate scientist, actually. And he taught us, children, when we were much too young to really understand anything about it, that air was a fluid. And this then created actually quite a lot of cognitive dissonance when we got to elementary school and tried to explain to other people that air was a fluid. But it was very ingrained in our consciousness that it was. And so we never thought of it as a void. And we never thought of it in association with nothing because it was a fluid. And so I wondered whether if you were to think about different sciences other than astronomy, where you sort of go from the void of air to the dark matter, which is not a void, through astronomy. But if you think about the air as somehow not a void, but as itself a thing, whether that would do anything for you or have any relevance to what you're thinking about.
Well, I don't know, but it's interesting. I was reading this this book on chaos theory, and I was saying that turbulence is a prime example of chaos theory, and they still kind of don't understand how turbulence works. I don't know if this relates, but in terms of the air or the air being fluid, or about the kind of physics of what maybe has to do with flow or so. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think anything like physically related like that will help me.
Well, I was just thinking about the Duchamp, right? The Marcel Duchamp. If
Yeah.
you think about air as not a void, that is not a piece about a void.
Right. Well, I mean, that's where like the whole void thing. I mean, it's just, and that's kind of what I was saying about the Yves Klein void, and I'm sure that Yves Klein knew that. I mean, whatever. Like, it's obviously a metaphor, obviously, but even beyond that, like the idea that air is, I mean, it's baryonic, it's atomic, it's like and so how does that at all relate to the idea of the void? yeah, it's a metaphor, or it's a kind of illustration of. That's why I was saying like the. Like Deschamps uses air as, or something like, air is the kind of baryonic representative of nothing. Like we think, oh, it's just air, but that is, quite a bit. And, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I kind of. I think a lot about death in relation to nothing.
So it's like it's the absence of something then.
But see, that's the whole thing, right? I mean, it's also an unimaginable. Yeah, I guess there's no need to think about it.
I have a question. Do you think there is that a void exists anywhere in the universe? Do you believe there is a void?
I don't
like
think,
even a square inch of void.
Oh, I feel like it's kind of funny. It's kind of like the on the news they say, NATO or whatever will defend every square inch of NATO territory or something. But no, I don't think that it's about like where something is.
So
it's kind of like, okay, if you take the atom and you think about an electron's position versus a proton, it's far away,
right?
And there's nothing in there,
right?
Or so. So it's kind of like but that still is just a metaphor or something. I don't know. I think.
There's a question.
Oh, you know? Me?
Oh no, behind you.
I have one too.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to go first? Okay, so you're here. You've spoken a lot about emptiness and voids, and the one thing that I'm surprised you didn't talk so much about, and I just want to invite you to say a bit more about in relation to what you're working on is memory. That's it. That's the question. Just tell us more about memory in relation to where you're at with, because you mentioned death, right, as a thing that you're thinking with a lot, and deep history in that list of, I think about a lot of dark, bad things. And then I was expecting, and that's probably my trouble, but I was expecting memory, and I wonder if I can coax you into telling us a bit about what that triggers.
You mean like what I think about memory, or
like what you think about memory in relation to whether it's the big void or the big void, where memory is in this thing, or you can even, if you want to, you can talk about memory and the choco balls. This there seems to be something that you're after that may, we may have a bit more access to it that way.
Well, I don't know. I tend to try to localize memory to what I looked up online last night or something.
Thanks.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I got you.
Kind of, just, I don't know, trying to trace down things by facts as much as possible. And memories are not facts. Except for in court of law or something.
Thank you.
My question is more profane. Since you were talking about these workers coming here and setting up the thing and taking it down. On the 1st of May, usually the workers are like more out protesting or at home. So are these workers, are they real? Are the workers real that are going to do this?
That's why I selected May Day, because I knew it wouldn't happen. You know? And that I would be the only one out there hammering something, you know, it's... So we'll see what happens in a year. Yesterday.
Thank you for that. That was just like brilliant and mind-blowing. It sounded like in your early student days, you were really interested in dynamical systems like exploding dirt. And I was wondering if you were thinking maybe about this in dynamical terms, like maybe the thing would collapse upon itself until it got really, really small and dense like a black hole. Or maybe it would like explode and like get so diffuse that like the atoms would diffuse and then it would be almost nothing in that way.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I removed this from the talk, but nothing is expensive. Like I'm for another project, I'm trying to work with electron microscopes and for a project, and so kind of it's weird. The smaller you get, the more expensive. The bigger you get, the more expensive, and then the smaller you get, the more expensive. So that's kind of why, you know, little nothing and big nothing and little big nothing, which an alternative title was Big Whoop. But yeah, I think that the more you try to make things like big, or the more you try to make things small, the harder it is, and why, or something.
Yeah, thank you. That was really fabulous and entertaining and interesting. And in a way, I wanted to ask you if you've thought about community and sort of the potential of nothing to create community. And I'm thinking of two ways. It's come up in two ways. Like one, piggybacking on your question about May Day, the workers are out doing nothing on May Day, and in a way creating community around protesting or celebrating or partying on the streets. But it's a way of creating community around doing nothing. And then also thinking about Robert Boyle's air pump, which was sort of the scientific demonstration of the vacuum, which also created sort of the modern democratic liberal community by bringing people together to witness the experiment by which the first vacuums were created.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, how community or the making of community might figure into your thinking.
Not at all. Not to be a dick, but I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
Okay.
Yeah, but that's a great question, because also it's like, if you're working on this idea of nothing, what is the kind of motivation then to express express that or show that or something? Is that some sort of like weird? Is it like not art? Is it like a religious thing or like a or whatever philosophical thing, or is it why would you?
Like, thinking about Duchamp or Deep Klein, this tradition of avant-garde artists, they were kind of articulating a kind of art where anything was permissible as an art object, which sort of led to this kind of post-conceptual morass that we're in, where anything goes as an art object. So kind of in thinking about nothingness, or you're kind of looking at it from another angle, or that could be a motivation for how it intersects with the historical predecessors that you were
Right, yeah. But there's not a question there. It's just.
Well, you were saying, what would motivate one as an artist to look into?
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. So that's an answer. Yeah. Yeah, totally. No, I think I understand what you're saying, and that's very interesting. It's kind of. Well, I don't know. Do you think that then that is like a reactionary thing, or if I'm reading you right, you're saying like what's going on now in art, and everything goes, and a response to that is nothing.
Or maybe
it's to like talk about nothing or something. Yeah, I didn't really think about that, but. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's why I'm trying to I'm trying to model it, or something, I mean, I guess the question is, why even try to model?
Thank you. I loved your performative presentation. I wanted to ask you if you ever thought of the word nothing as no thing.
Yeah, all the time.
What's the difference?
Well, I mean, just logically, the difference is there's a space between the no and the thing.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, like when I write stuff, to talk about, I always think about that, and I think about, and then also something, everything, like something started to mean the same thing as everything to me, or so, and but yeah, I think about that, but and I think the thing is if you say no thing, that means it is a thing.
Exactly.
And so then that's not cool.
Thank you for this lecture. So maybe in the same no cool orientation or disorientation or reorientation or Orientalism, I will ask about nothing, not as necessarily no thing, but the nothing as a verb rather than a noun. Because you spoke about void mostly, or nothing, mostly as a noun. But what about the verb?
Right, yeah.
And also in relation to the, the void that you mentioned in the document, also in relation to what Klein is doing. If you can say something about nothing and void as a verb, even though one doesn't exist as a verb.
Yeah.
And the other question is about why did you end your lecture with orientation why would you end your lecture with orientation if the void or nothing were not verbs? So I think that the orientation is because the nothing is a verb, exists as a verb.
Right.
Maybe I'm not clear enough.
Well, no, I think I get it, but those are kind of the same question, no? Yeah. And yeah, well, I think I ended because I didn't know what I was talking about, and I don't know how I'm still processing this whole thing with orientation and kind of researching stuff like. I'm very much into like augury. It's called divination by the birds is a thing, and been reading about ancient understanding of orientation, and there's a reason why the model out here is set where it's set. It's facing the south. And then maybe to answer the question is that orientation to the west is typically death or the underworld, and what's up with that? And orientation from ancient times is always you face the south, and then there's a whole left and right, fortunate and like lucky left and this kind of thing, but. But I don't know. I mean, I think there's a reason why I stopped, like, thinking about the orientation aspect of, because everything else I kind of have a grip on, like in terms of form and like even time in a way, or the other three dimensions and. Orientation, there's a lot of like kind of hocus pocus, going on, and so yeah. So I think the answer is this is what I'm kind of like reading about now, or like interested in like right now.
Is orientation the negation of nothing? Or isn't orientation the negation of nothing?
Or the kind of beginning. I don't know. That's the thing. It's kind of like, even what is orientation? And that's why I read the thing about how we moderns or whatever think about things as about our body and about left and right and so. But ancients was a different kind of understanding. Then it's like the relation to the sun or whatever.
Yeah, like Stonehenge, they orientated the stones in a certain way because the sun,
right.
for a reason, and people orientate a house maybe for those kind of reasons too, or if there's a body of water, or woods,
yeah.
or there's like physical reasons why people orientate, built structures in a certain way. So I think it seems like you have this idea, like an ideal. It's like a monument to me, or it feels like a monument to like nothingness or death. I mean, it feels like a monument to death to me, but. And now you have this thing, and you are trying to figure out what you know, the next step, like, yeah, what, I mean, because it is actually important. You want to make this giant thing, and, you know, what reason, you know.
And for like one day.
Yeah, and why should it be one way? Like, everything else sort of makes sense, but then you
Right,
don't
yeah,
have the reason
yeah.
why it has to sit a certain way yet.
Right, and I feel like we don't think about that, like as artists, maybe we don't think about, like as architects, you think about that more than artists. You know what I mean? Like Soloist or somebody probably didn't. It's like, okay, the room goes this way, so therefore this goes this way, not. And that kind of relates back to like the body. This is what's really important is this is my right hand, and I like you know, as opposed to like something else, like celestial or.
But you know, in the sense that these are kind of architectural drawings, right? And they have a scale, and you have this little scale figure in the upper right one. And I mean, why don't you swap out the word, say, space, right? Like in a kind of Donald Juddian way, right? You'd be talking about an object in the space, which is the garden, and the object itself frames a space. You know, it feels like you obscure it by saying nothing. I mean, but from this project to Da Vinci, I mean, these are somehow frames that define a kind of space and kind of architectural or Sarah or Judd sense of a piece of sculpture. So why not swap that out? I mean, you used that word a minute ago.
What, swap out?
Space for nothingness.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Swap out space for nothingness. That's a good question. I think that but nothingness. Those are kind of opposites in a way. Like nothing is not space. I mean, that's the opposite of space.
These are possibly the famous last words. Because space is something that we will deal with right now. First of all, thank you for a fascinating talk where I would probably think that listening to your thoughts about nothing really encouraged everything here in these brains when I look at them. It was outstanding. Thank you so much. So hoping that the contrary of nothing will be on our plates, I warmly invite you to the 2 other rooms and have dinner with us. Thank you so much.